While we've covered many weird and wonderful movies and subgenres of the horror landscape already on 80s Horror Memories, I must admit I've been looking forward to this one. As a part of our series on 1985, we covered the Michael J. Fox classic Teen Wolf, a movie that's hugely different from the one we're focusing on in this episode, but they do have one thing in common: body horror. When you think of directors you would generally associate with that term, then undoubtedly both Davids, Cronenberg and Lynch, would crop up in conversation. R.A.L. Cruz sums up body horror, or biological horror, in his book Mutations and Metamorphosis. Body horror is biological horror, as a subgenre of horror that intentionally showcases grotesque or psychologically disturbing violations of the human body or to any other creature. Cronenberg classics such as Videodrome or The Fly certainly fall into this description, as do similar Lynch classics like Eraserhead. It may be a more experimental take on the body horror genre, but the opening scene of that movie, in which a huge sperm-like creature appears from a floating head, shows the mythic status of Lynch's movies. Thankfully, my parents were incredibly liberal with what I watched as a young lad, learning Metallica riffs in my room while I wondered which of the latest horror movies my brother had acquired from his latest trip to the high seas. He actually went through a phase where he could have been mistaken as a pirate. Maybe it was intentional.
Savvy.
Anyway, I digress. Films such as Eraserhead had passed me by at that point in my adolescence. But another movie, not traditionally regarded as horror, but had body horror front and center in its narrative, was firmly on my hormonal radar: RoboCop. Paul Verhoeven's brutal classic satire on society is possibly the most influential movie of the 1980s for this particular gorehound. But are we correct in saying that it could easily pass as a horror movie, all things considered? Or is it simply an amazing example of visceral science fiction filmmaking? Well, get that 6000 SUX on order and stock up on baby food as we look back on everyone's favorite 80s law enforcer, RoboCop, on 80s Horror Memories.
Come quietly or there will be trouble.
Ah, fuck you!
When I think about how many references and nods to the decade there are in modern pop culture, growing up as a kid in the 80s was pretty cool. We were spoiled for choice when it came to sneaking out to our local cinema, of which there were 2 near where we lived. Not huge multiplexes like the ones that somehow survived a pandemic and the streamers, but 2 independent venues that were either a decent walk away or a short drive if mom or dad were taking us. One of the venues still exists today, but its programming generally focuses on either plays at Christmas time or cover bands or artists every week. It's a great venue that saw my brother and I sneak in to see cool 1987 films such as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Batteries Not Included, The Secret of My Success, or even Fatal Attraction. Alright, I confess, we never managed to skip the Ushers to see that one. But the schoolyard was abuzz with rumors of a bunny being boiled and Jack from Romancing the Stone having some rather more serious lady trouble this time. One dodgy VHS later acquired that same year confirmed both rumors to be true. Unfortunately, we never managed to sneak past the dozy ushers to see RoboCop in 1987, so my first exposure to the movie was via one of the local terrestrial TV stations who heavily censored the film, cut it to shreds in fact. I adored the movie instantly, despite some of the best scenes being trimmed even though it was being shown post-Watershed.
Your client's a scumbag, you're a scumbag, and scumbags see the judge on Monday morning.
Listen, pal. Your client's a crumbag, you're a crumbag, and crumbags see the judge on Monday morning.
When RoboCop foils the store robbery, the thug's F-word expletives were dubbed to
Why me?
While we never got to see Murphy's brutal execution in full, and even Emil's melty death by toxic waste was massively trimmed. However, all was not lost. My older brother, Captain John Sparrow, managed to get his grubby hands on an uncut copy of the film on VHS. And finally, we were able to experience the movie just as director Verhoeven had intended, uncut in all its gory glory. Murphy's execution was brutal. The locker room scene had naked breasts, and Emil's head was gleefully splattered across the speeding vehicle's windshield. Murphy's transformation from being an ordinary police officer and family man into a seemingly emotionless cyborg was shown in full, and it elevated the movie for me exponentially. It's in these scenes that RoboCop blurs the line between sci-fi and horror.
I fucking love that guy!
With his cybernetic body that shimmers in Detroit's nighttime neon-lit cityscape, plus a futuristic visor, well, it was for the time, scanning the streets for any sign of crime, RoboCop is pure sci-fi. However, if you look past this and take a deep dive into the shiny metallic narrative of this movie, you may just be surprised to see a nasty horror poking out from under the helmet of the law enforcer. The gruesome and very memorable transformation of Officer Alex Murphy into the mechanized RoboCop is a brutal scene, doesn't hold back on the horror we see unfurling for its protagonist. Murphy has been separated from his partner, trapped by Clarence Boddicker and crew, mercilessly torn apart and left for dead. When OCP chooses him for its RoboCop program, we see how ruthless the apparent good guys are with what they choose to keep off the unfortunate police officer.
Well, he signed the release forms when he joined the force. He's legally dead. We can do pretty much what we want to. Lose the arm.
It's a grim representation of the human body, being brutally invaded, maimed, and eventually reassembled, elements that are hallmarks of body horror as we know it.
RoboCop is another one of those examples of machinery, sentience. Are they going to happen? Of course, the RoboCop was part human. I think he started as a human. They roboed him up later. So is it worth it? This is the question I asked myself watching it. Is it worth it to mechanize parts of me that might be dead and carry on? Or should I just die when it's time for me to naturally die? And especially when it comes to law enforcement or any kind of enforcement of rules and regulations, and if there's a machine that's checking us on that, will it have any understanding and any humanity to offer us? Because everything isn't just black and white answers. There's a gray area on so many things that like a person would be able to listen to our story and go, well, you know what, like a traffic cop, I'll let you off on this time, but here's a warning, don't do it again. Right, a robo may not understand that. It's like, here are the rules. You are not in compliance. Bum bum bum. That's like when you're on a customer service phone line and you're like, no, there's not an option for the what I need. Are you wanting to close your account? Press 1. If you're wanting to pay your account, press 2. It's like none of the options apply to the question that I have for this last bill I got, and so you can't. So if you have a cop in front of you that has that same mentality of, well, here's the options I have, that's it, no humanity, that scares me to death again, yes.
Looking back on RoboCop, you can see the clear links to both body and psychological horror running throughout the narrative. Set in a violent, near-apocalyptic Detroit, evil corporation Omni Consumer Products wins a contract from the city government to privatize the police force. To try out their crime-eradicating cyborgs, they need a fallen officer to be their test subject. So when new street cop Alex Murphy, played by the excellent Peter Weller, is murdered by crime lord Boddicker, played with gleeful menace by Kurtwood Smith, OCP uses his body to support their untested RoboCop prototype. However, when RoboCop learns of the company's nefarious plans, he turns on his masters. The concept of human identity is not only brutally challenged, but also distorted, much like Murphy's body, throughout the narrative. We don't just see Murphy being executed, we also see the very essence of the man all but stripped away, then manipulated and transformed into something largely artificial. This resonates with the themes of psychological horror, with it not only Murphy's body that we see being torn apart and reassembled, but his own mind, identity, and sanity are also twisted almost beyond repair. I must admit that a lot of these themes went over the head of this particular young movie fan when I first saw the uncut version of the film. That doesn't mean I didn't appreciate how brutal the violence was, or how heartbreaking Murphy's journey is for not only him, but also his family. Despite them only having limited screen time, of course, I was enthralled by how director Paul Verhoeven was able to create a movie that effortlessly blended futuristic sci-fi action and violence with an engaging story. The script also managed to introduce supporting and side characters with their own unique personalities and motives. Even poor Bobby, with a short appearance and unwitting ability to fly, is one of the most memorable characters.
Can you fly, Bobby?
Clarence, no!
Just because Boddicker uses him as a human police deterrent. My brother and I would recreate several scenes from the movie when we were mucking around. But with him being built like a brick shithouse, I was never Bobby. It was only when I watched the uncut version of the movie with more mature eyes that the biting satire and social commentary brought more meaning to the film for me. Movies were often heavily censored for TV broadcast in the 80s, and even though I disagreed with it one iota, it wasn't just RoboCop that fell victim to the trend. John McClane's Yippee-ki-yay motherfucker was changed to
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon.
The point is that movies such as RoboCop have to be experienced just as their director intended.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
In all of their uncut glory. The hardcore violence is an element of the movie that lends itself perfectly to the themes in the film, especially in the fine line it treads between humanity and artificiality. Murphy's mechanical existence finds the officer stuck somewhere between being entirely alive or entirely dead, which has been a constant theme of existential horror in classic literature. There's a neat parallel between RoboCop and the novel Frankenstein from 1818, written by English author Mary Shelley. The story revolves around a gifted scientist called Victor Frankenstein, who succeeds in giving life to a being of his own creation. However, the resulting entity is not exactly the perfect specimen that he had hoped for, and Victor and mankind ultimately rejected the hideous creature in general. Just like the creature in Shelley's novel, RoboCop is a creation who struggles to find his own way in an increasingly volatile and unforgiving world. Of course, the creature in Frankenstein is of limited intelligence, while RoboCop is much the opposite. His strength and abilities are heightened by the cybernetic suit that he finds himself now entwined with. However, both Frankenstein and RoboCop start out with incomplete memories of their past, and slowly regain fragments over time. Murphy's in the form of his family and murder.
You really don't remember me, do you?
Excuse me. I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.
RoboCop is a really sly satire and commentary on American consumerism and policing for profit. You certainly think our world with prisons for profit and all these other things is directly predicted by that film, and the sheer craziness of it, and how it incorporates all the advertisements and the I'll buy that for $1, and it captures the world we live in now with a relentless savagery and humor. Yeah, no, RoboCop is and it has that great score done by the same composer who did Conan the Barbarian, you know, and it's and the suit is amazing. Again, Rob Bottin created suit, and you know, Peter Weller's performance, and it's another tragic monster movie, right? Another tragic Frankenstein story. Is I am created deliberately by somebody who, you know, wants to just forget my humanity exists, and that's a problem when I come back to roost. So yeah, it's a great story. Murphy's murder is one of the most horrendous violent scenes I've ever seen.
Our household back in the 80s was probably much the same as most folk at the time. We had a standard 4x3 TV with 4 channels and a remote that was connected to it via a long, cumbersome wire. The most high-tech gaming technology that we had was a rubber-keyed ZX Spectrum 48K that would later be upgraded to a Commodore Amiga, plus a family dog and a one-eyed hamster. Don't ask, it's a long story. One constant, however, was our unified love of horror, especially between my brother and myself. As I mentioned, our parents would let us watch some fairly explicit TV shows and movies, which was in contrast to our friends. One of my pals had a birthday party in which we all gathered around to watch Top Gun on VHS, only for his mom to fast forward during the tame, soft-focused sex scene between Cruise and McGillis. One thing that always fascinated me, not only in horror movies but also in any movie genre, were the villains. I was also obsessed with Star Wars as a kid and always found the bad guys far more compelling than Luke and their friends. Sure, Han Solo was cool as fuck.
Chewie, take the professor in the back and plug him into the hyperdrive.
But I always rooted for Vader and the Empire in the original trilogy. This is another major highlight of RoboCop, and something that also leans the movie in the direction of the horror genre, the Rogues Gallery. Clarence Boddicker doesn't exactly look fearsome or intimidating, but his sheer brutality and fearless persona is chilling. This is exemplified throughout the movie, especially when he's arrested by Robo, and upon being taken to the police station, he calmly looks at Sergeant Reed, spits blood, and says,
"Just give me my fucking phone call."
Of course, Boddicker's merciless taunting and execution of Murphy towards the beginning of the movie shows his truly gruesome nature, but it's in the movie's other, more subtle nuances that show the character for what he really is. The sheer monstrosity of Boddicker and his crew help to generate a palpable sense of dread in the film, a classic trope of the horror genre. RoboCop was a massive part of my movie watching life growing up, and it's a hugely influential piece of filmmaking for me as somebody working in the industry. Although I never appreciated the sequels, especially Part 3, which really needs to be blown up by one of Joe's rocket launchers. However, its legacy lived on, and I would play the video games on our ZX Spectrum and later on the Amiga. Apparently, some of RoboCop's VFX was created on the Commodore Amiga, so I guess it wasn't just good for the Robo games and Chucky Egg 2. While the movie boasts many sequences that elevate it beyond simply being a sci-fi classic, it's also the looming specter of technology that lends RoboCop to the horror genre. It's not necessarily the technology itself, it's the misuse and dehumanizing possibilities it presents that bring the horror. RoboCop's programming is so relentless that it constantly battles against his fading human memories, which also presents another parallel with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. They're both tortured by their creator's ambition, a pertinent metaphor for the uncontrolled advancement of technology, and the effect this could potentially have on society and the world as a whole. Ultimately, whether or not you agree that RoboCop is part sci-fi, part horror, but all cop, is entirely up to your own interpretation of the movie. However, I hope this video has given you something to ponder the next time you take a trip to the dystopian city of Detroit, as Robo battles his own sense of existence, while unfortunate office execs get obliterated, and expendable henchmen are thrown from speeding vans. Let us know your thoughts on RoboCop as a horror movie in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name? Murphy.
On the next episode, we head down to the Central South American rainforest to battle against one of the most iconic movie monsters ever created, with Predator. Until next time, gore hounds.
Get to the chopper!
Hi friends, your humble narrator Tyler Nichols here, and I hope that you enjoyed that episode of 80s Horror Memories. If you missed our previous episode, click over here. If you want to see more from our series, click up here. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right here. And most importantly, stay spooky, folks.